Hello and welcome to the second part of these Mage Gloomfury tutorials. In today's video, we will be focusing on the mechanics of the boss itself, some more optimized gearing and the haste breakpoints around that, followed by the rotation when using Ice Cool Orb. So to start, Gloomfury's casts. He has two main skills, Summon Rune Discs and Rune Fire Blast. The former is cast every 10 seconds, but we don't need to worry about that, assuming that we have Shamans. Summon Rune Disc can come in two forms. Don't need to worry about it if it is just purple circles moving around randomly. However, if it is a line of them in a wall formation, you need to go to the gap. When moving to the gaps in the wall, it is optimal to move only when casting an Instabolt or Chilling Radiance. This is because your cast times are not increased for moving. Then moving on to the gearing. As in part 1, it's still optimal to prioritise intelligence, haste, critical and then max damage. However, on one piece, either an armlet, bag, ring or amulet, I would recommend running intelligence, min, max, haste, while your average run will lower in DPS. When going for that Gloomfury record, that tiny bit of RNG that you're losing is instead put into additional damage. The haste stat is still required on all 9 pieces, as the minimum value to be competitive on Gloomfury is 40.8% haste. This is because it gives you an extra chilling tick in every single hypo chilling. After that, there are not many important breakpoints, and it's not really worth sacrificing other stats for a better haste roll. Now, moving on to the charms. Charms are again very similar to part 1, but it is important you know which charm to use when. So, Candle is used on all runs, so is Skull. However, if you can predict that the round length is going to be less than 95 seconds long, then swap in Talon for Candle immediately after using Hypo on that precasted Candle. This is a region of about 1 second as the boss fight starts before you get combat tagged and can't charm swap anymore. Now on to what skills we should be using. The set displayed on screen is by far the best setup for Gloomfury. In fact, it is about 8% better than any other setup. As you will notice, this is a different skill setup to in part 1, mainly because of the introduction of Ice Cool Orb. This is quite a fiddly skill to get the hang of, so I'm going to briefly explain how it works. It has a cooldown of 6 seconds, but this is often reduced with haste to around 2.5 to 3 seconds on the boss fight. It is used really well in combination with Deep Freeze and Chilling Radiance. When you have a Deep Freeze, you're going to want to Orb, then cast a Shatter, then 2 bolts and then an Orb. This again maximizes your DPS output from your orbs. Another key interaction to understand with Ice Cool Orb is when you use a casted Ice Bolt and then an Instabolt at the end of that, you can completely skip the global cooldown before the next orb is casted, practically giving you a free skill. I'll explain more about global cooldown in a moment. My final tip with Ice Cool Orb is to stand right next to the boss, because it will instantly hit the boss due to its AoE nature as soon as you have cast it. This is just really useful for trying to cram in extra bolts into Deep Freeze. Now, moving on to one of the most misunderstood concepts in Hordes.io, GCD, or Global Cooldown. The purpose of this is to prevent people from being able to cast a revitalized stack every 0.05 seconds. Instead, it causes a delay which allows the game to flow much more naturally as a combat system. However, there are several bugs that you can abuse with global cooldown. One of these can be done by mounting up and then instantly clicking Revitalize, allowing you to stack people before PvP starts much quicker. Another way that is much more relevant for us in this video is Ice Cool Orb. As I mentioned earlier, when an instabolt goes through and hits the boss, it creates a period where the system doesn't quite understand how long your orb cooldown is. Then you can cast the orb in that moment of confusion, skipping some of its cooldown, as well as ignoring the global cooldown. This is useful as it increases our DPS over the length of a run by roughly 5 to 10%. This is something you get through feel, and you will just come across it by accident. Once you've done that, just try to replicate it. So a normal cast bolt, an insta-bolt on the end of that, and then orb. But Velin, who cares about all of that when you don't know which skills that I'm meant to use? Well, here is the starting rotation for optimized Gloomfury. If your haste is below about 40%, just get rid of that second Ice Core Orb and it should flow much better for you. However, if you have that minimum threshold of 40.8% haste, this is the absolute rotation that you need. Occasionally it will fail where Talon doesn't activate until the second orb, but if it activates before then you know just to run this setup. There is sometimes a global cooldown reduction that you can do between the third ice bolt of the three into that first deep freeze ice core orb, but generally it's pretty free of any other complications. Now for the middle rotation, it's very similar to what I mentioned in part 1 with hypo and chilling being chained together in 2-to-1 ratio, and the deep freeze only gets slightly more complicated where you have to cast an orb followed by a Shatterfrost followed by 2 bolts and then another orb. Just need to repeat this with bolt spam in between to get to your deep freezes as soon as possible. The ending is again similar to part 1, but instead of your last skill being Ice Bolt, you want to use Ice Core Orb instead. As I mentioned earlier, with the AoE nature of it, it can hit the boss instantly and therefore just about tick in an extra hit of damage rather than an Ice Bolt finishing last. The other priorities, as you can see, are on screen. Finally, a last minute addition to this video is the Gloom Drop allocation. On one column you can see the minimum percentage of the item that you're going to get, and on the other column you can see the amount of DPS that is required in order to hit that percentage. These may not be entirely accurate, but they're pretty close approximations and still useful for you to have a vague idea of what performance you get for how much damage. And so on that note, I'm going to leave you guys with a challenge to beat. I'll be funding all this, so don't go too crazy with the records, but as you can see on screen are the different records for the different round lengths. And if you beat any of them, DM me proof with the boss log and post a pot, and my stash will empty into yours. However, it is only valid for the first person to break the record. Even if you break that person's record after them, it doesn't count, so make sure you get in there early. As ever, thanks for watching, and that's it for my Mage Gloomfury guides. Let me know if there's any other guides that you want me to do. Until then, see you, goodbye.